In the previous video, we created AWS VPC and Internet Gateway. In this video, we will create two public subnets and two private subnets using Terraform and create appropriate subnet tags that EKS managed Kubernetes cluster can discover and create public and private load balancers. Okay, let's get started and open the Visual Studio Code. In the previous video, we created the VPC provider and Internet Gateway.tf file. Alright, in this video we're gonna create the subnets.tf. Let me close this. Let's create the first public subnet. So you can, again, as always, you can take this link and open it. And you can take that link, open it, and you can find all the arguments that it can accept here, right? So let's define our subnet. So the first argument that it expects is VPC ID. We can get this VPC ID from the previous file. Here under the vpc.tf, we created the VPC, right? So this particular resource has a few outputs variables, and one of them is the ID. So we can grab this, the whole thing, and use it here. All right, so the next argument is the seeder block. We need to define how many IP addresses we want to allocate, how big that subnet will be. So it's going to be 192.168.0.0.18. Then we're going to define the availability zone. And since we're going to create the we're going to create 4 subnets, and we're going to place them in 2 separate availability zones. We're going to take public and private in one zone, and the second 2 we're going to place in the different availability zone, which is a recommendation from the AWS itself. And here we're gonna take, this is our region, US East, and this is the 1A is the availability zone. All right, now let's also define some other parameters. Let me close this again. And map public IP on launch. So that means that every new instance that will be deployed in the public subnet will automatically get the public IP address. And this is the requirements from the EKS itself, that if you decide in some reason to deploy your worker nodes not in the private subnet but in the public subnet, all those instances have to have public IP addresses and in order to join the cluster. So this is the requirements from EKS. And we also, in our case, we're gonna use the public subnets only to deploy public load balancers, which we will do later on. All right, and the last argument, it's very important as well. We need to create certain tags for subnet. So the first one is the name, which is not very important, just the name that you're gonna see in the console. Well, since it's a public, I have the prefix public, and then the availability zone. And then those 2 are required. So the first one is cluster EKS shared. That means that it will allow EKS cluster to discover this particular subnet and use it. And the second one, well, the third one, right? Kubernetes.io role ELB. This is mandatory as well. So if you want to deploy the public load balancers and you want EKS to deploy, well, when you create the Kubernetes service type of load balancer and you want to create the public load balancer, this tag will be used by EKS to discover those subnets, and it will place those load balancers in those subnets. All right, so this is one. And we need to deploy. We need to create 3 more. Let's create another public subnet. It's going to be very similar. And let me do it quickly. Just copy paste it. And well, obviously it's going to be public 2 and the same ID. It's going to be the different seeder. It's going to be next one. So it's this one starts from 0 and it ends 63. So this will start from 64. Then we're gonna use a different availability zone. We're gonna use different availability zone for this 1B, and the same thing here. Public IP address is required, and pretty much the same tags, except that this one will be 1B. All right, and now let's create two private subnets. Let me copy paste it. Okay, so I just copy pasted two subnets, and well, let's talk about the first private one first. So same ID, well, next Cedar, and this will be US East 1A availability zone, which is the same that we used in the public one. So public one and private one will be deployed those subnets in the same availability zone. All right, so and here we don't need any public IP addresses, and so we're gonna give it the same tag name, the same exactly tag that will allow EKS to discover this subnet, and this one is very important as well. This internal ELB will allow EKS cluster to deploy private load balancers in these subnets. So if you will not create these tags, EKS won't be able to create those load balancers. And pretty much same thing here for the private 2. The difference is Cedar. The same availability zone, which is what we used in public 2 in this one. And pretty much the same tags, except this one will use 1B. All right, so let's go to the terminal and let's run Terraform FMT again to format the code. Then let's run Terraform plan. And it will create the 4 subnets. Looking good. And now let's apply. Okay, let's type yes. And we're gonna create 4 subnets. Well, right now they technically not private and public subnets. They just I would say, containers to become private and public. Later on, we will create the NAT gateways that we're gonna place in the public subnets. We're gonna create 2 NAT gateways to make it high available. We're gonna create and place them in public subnets, and we're gonna create the routing table and associate them with the appropriate subnets. In the next video, we're actually gonna create the NAT gateway. All right, let's to finalize this video, let's take a look what we have in AWS console. Let's search for and here under the subnets, you're gonna see that we have the 4 subnets. Right now they just have different names, right, and tags, and they have exactly the same main routing table, which is this one, since we haven't created those yet. In the next video, we're gonna create 2 NAT gateways, and we will place them in the public subnets.